Texas, 1944. A group of German women prisoners stood in the scorching heat. Their wrists were red and raw, chained for 3 long weeks. They had crossed an ocean, expecting torture, expecting starvation, expecting the worst. But then a cowboy walked toward them. He wasn't carrying a weapon, he was carrying bolt cutters. He looked at their chains, looked at their frightened faces. Then he said something that made every woman freeze in shock. 5 simple words, words that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. "You won't need these here." The chains hit the ground. The women couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't believe what just happened. What came next? You won't believe it. These German prisoners, enemies of America, were about to experience something that would destroy everything they believed about Americans, something that would change their lives forever. This wasn't propaganda, this was real. And this story has been hidden for decades. Stay with me until the end. This is one of the most incredible, untold stories from World War II. If you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell icon so you never miss another hidden piece of history. Drop a like if you want more stories that schools never taught you. Now let's go back to that dusty ranch in Texas, where everything changed. Camp Hearn, Texas, late June 1944. The heat hit them like a physical blow. Elsa had known summer warmth in Berlin, but this was different. This was air so thick you could taste it. Temperature climbing past 100 degrees Fahrenheit and staying there. The sun felt closer here, angrier, pressing down on everything with weight that made breathing feel like work. The train doors opened on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. The sun was already fierce. Camp Hearn spread before them, row after row of wooden barracks, guard towers built from raw lumber, wire fences gleaming in the brutal light. The camp was new, still being finished. Construction workers hammered in the distance. Dust hung in the still air. Nearly 4,000 prisoners were held here. Most were men, Afrika Korps soldiers captured in North Africa, tanned and tired and far from home. But one section had been set aside for approximately 100 German women gathered from various captures across Europe and brought here for what the Americans called administrative efficiency. Elsa and the other women were unloaded from the train. Still chained, 4 by 4 they shuffled into the processing building. Photographs, fingerprints, numbers assigned, names recorded. Then came clothes. Simple cotton dresses in drab colors, probably donated by American civilians. The sizes were wrong. American women were built differently, apparently. The dresses hung loose on most of the German prisoners, making them look smaller than they were, like children playing dress-up. Through all of this, the chains remained. Elsa had worn them for 3 weeks now. From France, to ship, to America, to Texas. The metal had worn grooves into her wrists, not deep, but visible. Red marks that throbbed. She had stopped noticing the constant clinking sound, had learned to sleep despite Hilda's breathing on one side, Rosa's restlessness on the other. The chains had become normal. Then they met Jack Morrison. He was 59 years old, owner of a cattle ranch southwest of the camp. He needed workers. The war had taken most of his ranch hands. Young men shipped overseas or pulled into defense factories. His 5,000 acres of pasture needed tending. His cattle needed care. The labor shortage was desperate. Morrison stood in the camp's main administrative building wearing rancher clothes, denim jeans, worn leather boots, a shirt with pearl snap buttons, a hat faded by years of Texas sun. His face was weathered like old wood. His hands were calloused and strong. He looked at the 12 chained women with an expression Elsa couldn't read. Beside him stood Wilhelm Fischer, a German-American from Fredericksburg who would serve as interpreter. Fischer had grown up in Texas speaking both languages, German at home, with immigrant parents, English everywhere else. Morrison spoke. Fischer translated. "These women will work at my ranch, farm work, livestock care, daily transport from camp, return each evening, pay deposited to camp accounts per Geneva Convention requirements." The camp commandant nodded. Standard arrangement. Morrison kept looking at the chains, at the red marks on wrists, at 4 women linked together like criminals. His jaw tightened. He said something sharp in English, directed at the commandant. Fischer hesitated, then translated. "Mr. Morrison wants to know why they're still chained." "Security protocol," the commandant replied stiffly. "They're enemy military personnel, trained, potentially dangerous." Morrison's response was longer, harder. His tone left no room for argument. Fischer translated carefully. "Mr. Morrison says chains are dangerous around livestock, could catch on equipment, could cause injury to workers and animals. He says he won't take them chained. Says if they're too dangerous to unchain, they're too dangerous for ranch work, and he'll find other labor." Silence filled the room. The commandant's face showed he'd had this argument before. Civilian contractors had leverage, the labor shortage was real, and Morrison clearly wasn't bluffing. The commandant made his decision. "Remove the chains." Elsa's heart stopped. A guard approached with keys. The metallic click of locks opening sounded impossibly loud. The mechanism connecting Elsa to Hilda released, then Rosa, then Hannelore. The chains fell. The sound of metal hitting concrete echoed through the building like a thunderclap. Elsa stared at her wrists. The grooves were still there, red, sore, strange. She lifted her arms experimentally, amazed at the freedom, at the absence of weight pulling her back. Around her, other women touched their wrists gently. Some stood frozen, overwhelmed. Hannelore cried silent tears. She quickly wiped away. Morrison stepped forward, spoke through Fisher. "You'll work hard. We'll treat you fair. You need something, you tell the foreman. You have problems, while you report them. That's the deal." He paused, looked each woman in the eye, then added, "And you won't need chains here. Not on my ranch. Your people first, prisoners second." Fisher's voice wavered slightly, translating that last part, as if uncertain he'd heard correctly. People first, prisoners second. The words hung in the Texas heat like something sacred. That night, Elsa lay in her bunker alone for the first time in weeks, unchained, able to move freely. She couldn't sleep. Freedom felt too strange. Monday morning arrived hot and bright. 12 German women climbed into the back of a military truck at dawn. No chains, just 2 guards with rifles who looked bored rather than alert. The truck rumbled southwest through flat Texas landscape. Endless sky, scattered cattle, barbed wire fences running to horizons. 12 miles later, they arrived at Morrison Ranch. The ranch was vast, 5,000 acres of rolling pasture land. Cattle dotted the distance like toys. Windmills turned slowly in the morning breeze, pumping water from deep underground. The main house was white clapboard, with a wide porch surrounded by ancient oak trees that provided the only shade for miles. Barns and corrals clustered nearby, painted red, the wood silvered by decades of sun. Morrison met them in the yard. Beside him stood Tom Rawlings, his foreman, a lean man in his 50s who'd worked this ranch for 30 years. Several ranch hands stood nearby, all older men or teenage boys. The prime age workers had gone to war or taken higher-paying factory jobs, leaving ranches desperately short of help. Through Fisher, Morrison explained the work. Some women would tend the large vegetable garden that fed the ranch household and supplied produce for town markets. Others would handle livestock, feeding, watering, general maintenance. Still others would repair fences, a never-ending task on a ranch this size, where cattle and weather constantly tested the wire. Elsa was assigned to livestock work along with 5 other women, including Hilda and Rosa. Hannelore, because of her pregnancy, received lighter duty in the garden. They were given work gloves, heavy leather, worn but functional, too large for women's hands but serviceable. Morrison demonstrated how to use a pitchfork to toss hay into feeding troughs, how to pump water into metal tanks, how to move around cattle safely without startling them. Then they began. The work was brutal. Radio operation required mental focus but not muscle. This was different, lifting hay bales, hauling water buckets, walking miles across open pasture, checking fence lines. By mid-morning, Elsa's back ached. By noon, her hands were blistered despite the gloves, but she wasn't chained. That awareness returned constantly, surprising her each time. Every movement, reaching for hay, stretching to fill a water tank, walking freely across open ground, reminded her of freedom she'd stopped expecting. At noon, Morrison's wife appeared. Sarah Morrison was a practical woman in her 50s, kind in a no-nonsense way. She brought lunch on wooden trays, sandwiches made with thick bread and actual meat, fresh fruit, and a large pitcher of lemonade beaded with condensation. The women ate in the shade of a massive live oak. The guards sat nearby but didn't hover. Mrs. Morrison served the food with small gestures that conveyed respect. She placed plates in hands rather than dropping them on the ground. She made sure everyone had enough. When the first pitcher of lemonade emptied, she brought more without being asked. The lemonade was a revelation. Cold, sweet, tart. Shocking after weeks of tepid water and bitter coffee. Elsa drank slowly, trying to make it last, trying to memorize this taste. It felt like kindness, made liquid. Like proof that the world still contained sweetness, even for prisoners. Rosa spoke quietly in German. "This is strange." "What is?" Hilda asked. "All of it. The work, the food, the way they treat us." "Like people," Hilda said softly. "Like we're just workers," Rosa added. "Not enemies." Elsa wiped sweat from her forehead. "Maybe here we are. Maybe the war is somewhere else. Maybe on this ranch, we're just people who need work, and they're just people who need workers." The others were quiet, considering. If nationality and war could be temporarily suspended, if enemy status was contextual rather than absolute, then everything they'd been taught was more complicated than they'd believed. The afternoon brought different challenges. Tom Rawlings showed them how to repair a section of fence damaged by cattle, how to stretch wire tight, how to hammer staples into wooden posts without splitting the wood. Tom spoke little, but his instructions were clear. He didn't care that they were German, didn't care about politics or ideology. He cared whether they worked honestly and learned quickly. By those measures, he seemed satisfied. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink, the women loaded back into the truck for the return to Camp Hearn. Exhausted, sore, hands blistered and backs aching. But something had shifted. They had worked an honest day, had been treated fairly, had drunk cold lemonade under Texas sky, and been called by their names instead of their numbers. The chains were gone, and the world hadn't ended. 3 weeks into the work, Morrison had a problem. A cow had died giving birth. The calf survived, barely. It was weak, struggling, all legs and huge dark eyes. Without its mother, it would die within days unless someone bottle-fed it every few hours. Morrison walked into the barn where Elsa was stacking hay bales. He said something to Fisher, who translated. Mr. Morrison needs help with an orphan calf. It needs bottle feeding to survive. He's asking for a volunteer. Elsa's hand went up before she'd consciously decided. Morrison nodded, gestured for her to follow. The calf lay in fresh straw, too weak to stand. Morrison showed her how to mix the formula. Powdered milk, warm water, precise measurements, how to fill the oversized bottle, how to hold it at the correct angle, how to be patient while the calf learned to suck. They're stubborn at first, Morrison said through Fisher, but once they learn, they'll remember you. You'll be its mother now. Elsa knelt in the straw. The calf smelled like hay and warmth and something indefinably alive. She touched its neck gently, then guided the bottle toward its mouth. The calf resisted at first, turning its head, confused by this strange rubber nipple that wasn't its mother. Elsa persisted, patient, murmuring soft German words. She didn't even realize she was speaking. Then the calf latched on. It drank desperately, milk disappearing from the bottle, its tail twitching with satisfaction. Its entire body relaxed as it fed, trusting this stranger completely. Something cracked open in Elsa's chest, not broke, opened. She had never been maternal, never particularly liked children or animals, had never imagined herself as a caretaker for anything beyond radio equipment. But this calf needed her. Its survival depended on her patience, her attention, her willingness to return every few hours with a bottle. And the calf didn't care that she was German, didn't care about war or uniforms or enemy status. It just knew she brought food and warmth and safety. When the bottle emptied, the calf looked at her with eyes that held only gratitude. Morrison watched from the barn entrance. That calf won't forget you. You're its person now. Elsa nodded, not trusting her voice. She fed the calf 4 times a day for 2 weeks. Watched it grow stronger, watched it stand on wobbly legs, then run clumsily around the corral. Each feeding session felt like proof that she could create life instead of supporting systems designed for death. Then Morrison taught her to ride. It happened unexpectedly. He needed to move cattle between pastures, but his regular hands were occupied elsewhere. He looked at Elsa, at her competence with animals, at the way she moved around livestock without fear. You ever ride a horse? Fisher translated. No, Elsa admitted. Want to learn? She did, desperately. Morrison started her on an old mare named Patience, aptly named, calm and forgiving of beginner mistakes. He showed her how to mount, how to sit balanced in the saddle, how to hold the reins loosely, how to communicate through subtle shifts of weight. The first ride was terrifying and thrilling equally. The height, the movement, the power of a living creature beneath her that could choose to cooperate or rebel. But Patience was patient, and Elsa was determined. By the 3rd lesson, she could walk the horse, confidently. By the 5th, she could trot without panic. By the 10th, Morrison trusted her enough to help move small groups of cattle between pastures. Real work that freed his experienced hands for harder tasks. The transformation was remarkable. Elsa Richter, radio operator from Berlin, was becoming a cowgirl in Texas. She learned the ranch's geography, every pasture, every water source, every gate and fence line, learned which cattle were calm and which were difficult, learned to read weather in cloud formations and wind direction, learned to judge time by sun position instead of clocks. Her body changed too. Muscles developed in her arms, shoulders and legs. Her hands grew calloused, no longer soft from office work. Her skin darkened from constant sun. She became stronger than she'd ever been. Tom Rawlings noticed. One afternoon, working together to repair a windmill, he said in his slow drawl, "You got a natural feel for this work. Most city folks never develop it." "Berlin is very different from here," Elsa replied in careful English. Tom nodded. "War's a strange thing. Takes people from where they belong and drops them somewhere unexpected. Sometimes they find they belong in the new place better than the old." Elsa had no answer, but she thought about his words that night in her bunk. She thought about the calf that knew her voice, the horse that responded to her commands, the fence she'd repaired that would stand for years, the work that left her exhausted but satisfied in ways radio operation never had. She was still a prisoner, but she was also someone's person, someone capable, someone who mattered. The chains were gone from her wrists. She was beginning to feel them lift from her mind too. September 1944. The work continued through summer heat into autumn. 20 German women now worked at Morrison Ranch regularly. The program had expanded as word spread of the labor quality. The cattle were fed. The fences stood strong. The vegetable garden produced bushels of tomatoes, beans and squash. Elsa had become indispensable. She could ride as well as any ranch hand, could bottle feed calves, repair windmills, move cattle across pastures with quiet confidence. Tom Rawlings told Morrison she was the best worker he'd supervised in years, man or woman, prisoner or free. Her English improved rapidly through daily use. She understood Tom's drawl now, caught Morrison's dry humor, could joke with the younger ranch hands in simple sentences that made them laugh. The grooves on her wrists had faded completely. Only faint white lines remained where chains had marked her skin for 3 weeks. Then the news came. Germany was losing badly. The Allies were advancing from all sides. The war would end soon, maybe months, maybe a year. Prisoners would eventually be repatriated, sent home to whatever remained of their country. Morrison gathered all 20 German women in the barn on a Saturday afternoon in late September. The air smelled of hay and leather and the lingering warmth of the day. Golden light slanted through gaps in the wood. Fisher stood ready to translate. Morrison removed his hat, held it in weathered hands, looked at each woman in turn. Then he spoke. "You folks have worked here 4 months now. Good, honest work. Some of you," he nodded at Elsa, "have become genuinely skilled at ranch tasks most city people never learn." Fisher translated carefully. Morrison continued. "When you first arrived, chained, looking scared and worn down, I wasn't sure this would work. Wasn't sure prisoners could be trusted without constant watching. Wasn't sure Germans would take direction from Americans. Wasn't sure about a lot of things." He paused, choosing his words. "But you proved something important. You proved that people are people, regardless of which side of a war they're on. You proved that given decent treatment and real work, most folks respond with decent effort. You proved that chains and fear aren't necessary, just respect and fair dealing." The women listened in silence. Some understood English well enough now to catch his meaning before Fisher translated. Others waited for the German words. Morrison wasn't finished. "The war will end. You'll go home to Germany. What you'll find there, I don't know. Probably hardship, probably destruction, probably years of rebuilding." His voice softened. "But I want you to remember something. You're not prisoners first, you're not Germans first. You're people first. People with skills and worth and dignity that exists no matter what nations do, no matter who wins wars, no matter what." He looked directly at Elsa. "You became a cowgirl in Texas. That wasn't in any plan you made for your life, but you did it, became excellent at it. That's who you are, someone capable of learning hard things, adapting to impossible situations, doing difficult work with skill and grace." Fisher's voice wavered slightly, translating those last words. The compliment was so unexpected, so genuine, that several women's eyes filled with tears. Morrison concluded, "When you go home, don't let anyone reduce you to just a nationality, or just an enemy, or just whatever category they want. You're more than categories. You're individuals. Remember that." Silence filled the barn. Dust motes drifted in golden light. A horse stamped in a nearby stall. Somewhere outside, cattle lowed softly. Morrison gave each woman a parting gift. Work gloves, leather-worn but functional, and a handwritten note expressing gratitude for their labor. Elsa's note included an extra line in Morrison's careful handwriting. "You're welcome back if you ever want to visit. A cowgirl always has a place on this ranch." She folded the note carefully, placed it in her pocket next to a photograph of her parents, taken before the war. That evening, back at Camp Hearn, Hilda asked quietly, "What do you think he meant? People first?" Elsa was silent for a long moment. Then, "He meant the chains were never necessary. He meant we were always people, even when others saw us as threats. He meant who we are matters more than what side we fought on. Do you believe that? Rosa asked. I do now, Elsa said. I didn't when we arrived, but I do now. Around them, other women nodded slowly. Morrison had removed their chains on the first day, but today he'd told them why. May 8th, 1945, Germany surrendered. The news reached Camp Herne through official channels, a commandant's announcement, formal notification that the war in Europe had ended. The reaction among prisoners was mixed. Some felt relief, others devastation. Most felt numb, too overwhelmed to process what it meant. Elsa felt strangely disconnected. The war had been happening somewhere else for months. A distant abstraction while she fed calves and rode horses and repaired fences in Texas. Its end changed nothing immediately. She was still a prisoner, still working Morrison Ranch. The surrender was theoretically significant, but practically altered little in her daily life. But gradually, changes accumulated. Talk of repatriation began, processing schedules, transportation arrangements. The massive bureaucratic effort to return millions of displaced persons and prisoners to homelands transformed by defeat and occupation. Elsa was repatriated in August 1945. The journey reversed her arrival. Trucks to trains to ships across the Atlantic. But this time, no chains, no armed guards treating her like a threat, just exhausted people heading toward uncertain futures. She arrived in Hamburg, which was barely recognizable. Where a city had stood, now rubble stretched for miles. Buildings reduced to skeletal frames, streets buried under debris, the smell of dust and death still lingering months after the bombing stopped. From Hamburg, she made her way to Berlin, a difficult journey through broken transport systems, through zones controlled by different Allied powers, through checkpoints requiring endless paperwork. Berlin was worse than she'd imagined. The city center was a moonscape. Her family's apartment building had been hit by bombs, reduced to twisted steel and concrete fragments. Neighbors who survived told her the news she'd been dreading. Her parents were dead, killed in an air raid in February 1945, buried in a mass grave with hundreds of others. She was alone, completely alone, 24 years old in a destroyed city without family or home or prospects. Around her, millions of other Germans navigated similar devastation, loss, defeat, the grinding work of survival in circumstances that made survival seem impossible. But Elsa had something many others didn't. She had memories of Texas. She had skills learned on Morrison Ranch. She had knowledge, radical and sustaining, that people were people first, that dignity existed independent of national catastrophes, that chains could be removed by anyone willing to say, you don't need these here. She found work in reconstruction, physical labor, like the ranch, hauling rubble, clearing streets, the endless work of transforming ruins back into a functioning city. The work was brutal, but Elsa was strong now. Her hands were calloused. Her back was resilient. She could work full days without breaking. She also found Hilda again, purely by chance, in a bread line in the American sector. They recognized each other instantly, embraced with unexpected emotion. They talked for hours, shared stories of return, of what they'd found and lost. Do you think about Texas? Hilda asked. Every day, Elsa admitted. Me too, Hilda said quietly. About Morrison? About the moment the chains came off, about being treated like people instead of photographs she'd never mentioned, herself on horseback in Texas, squinting at the camera in bright sun, wearing work clothes and a slight smile. On the back, in Morrison's handwriting, Elsa Richter, cowgirl, June 1945, proof that people are people first, everything else second. This is what happened when German women arrived in Texas in chains. Cowboys removed them. Not because security changed, not because the women were harmless, but because someone decided chains weren't necessary for people doing honest work. That decision didn't change the war, didn't alter history's grand sweep, but it changed Elsa Richter, changed Hilda and Rosa and Hannelore and the others who worked Morrison Ranch. It taught them that humanity persisted even in war, that individuals could transcend national categories, that chains were removable by anyone willing to offer dignity instead of fear. The war ended, the prisoners returned, Germany rebuilt, but the memory remained, of chains falling away, of a Texas rancher saying, your people first, of proof that even enemies could be treated with decency. In the end, America's greatest weapon wasn't its bombs or its armies. It was this, the radical act of removing chains and trusting people to be people. 4 words that changed lives, 4 words that proved humanity was stronger than war. You won't need these. Texas, 1944. A group of German women prisoners stood in the scorching heat. Their wrists were red and raw, chained for 3 long weeks. They had crossed an ocean, expecting torture, expecting starvation, expecting the worst. But then a cowboy walked toward them. He wasn't carrying a weapon, he was carrying bolt cutters. He looked at their chains, looked at their enemies. In 1965, 20 years after the war ended, Elsa received a letter from Texas. Jack Morrison, now 79, writing to say he'd often wondered what became of the German women who'd worked his ranch. Hoped they'd survived, hoped they'd found peace. Elsa wrote back immediately, described her life in Berlin, her work, her survival, and rebuilding. Thanked him for treatment that had been humane when humanity seemed absent, for removing chains when protocol said they were necessary, for insisting she was a person first. Morrison's reply was brief, but powerful. That wasn't generosity, that was just decency. You worked hard, deserved respect. The chains were always wrong practically, wrong morally. I'm glad it meant something. Glad you survived in one. They exchanged letters sporadically over the years, short updates, occasional news, a connection maintained across oceans and decades. Morrison died in 1972. His daughter sent Elsa a copy of his obituary, along with a note. Dad spoke often of the German women who worked the ranch during the war. Said you taught him something important about human nature. Thank you. Elsa kept the letter, kept the worn work gloves Morrison had given her in 1945, kept the memory of chains falling away, of a rancher saying, "You won't need these here." She lived until 1998, dying at 77 in a Berlin transformed from ruins to prosperity. She had witnessed Germany's division and reunification, had contributed to its rebuilding, had survived when survival seemed impossible. In her possessions, her nieces found the gloves, Morrison's letters, and one frightened faces. Then he said something that made every woman freeze in shock. 5 simple words, words that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. "You won't need these here." The chains hit the ground. The women couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't believe what just happened. What came next? You won't believe it. These German prisoners, enemies of America, were about to experience something that would destroy everything they believed about Americans, something that would change their lives forever. This wasn't propaganda, this was real. And this story has been hidden for decades. Stay with me until the end. This is one of the most incredible, untold stories from World War II. If you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell icon so you never miss another hidden piece of history. Drop a like if you want more stories that schools never taught you. Now let's go back to that dusty ranch in Texas, where everything changed.